What's going on, guys? Dr. Andrew Fix back for another episode here on The Code. Thank you so much for tuning in, joining us on this podcast, whether it's your first time with us or you've been here for 100 plus. We really appreciate your time tuning in. Super excited to be bringing another one of our awesome interviews to you guys on The Code. We have my friend Tiffany Cellura with us. She is a leadership and development coach and consultant. Man, we've known each other for a little bit over a year, I think, at this point. And she really has a passion for helping people, helping organizations with communication, with developing their leaders to be better communicators with the people they're working with. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you and I were just talking a little bit off air before we hit record, but what I would love for you to do for all the people that have tuned in, if you could just go through and give us a bit more of a thorough introduction of yourself and how it is that you got into doing what you're doing now.
Sure, absolutely. So again, my name is Tiffany Cellura. I own Tiffany Cellura Coaching and Consulting, and I wasn't always a coach and consultant. In fact, many coaches and consultants started off doing something else. So what I started off doing was I was an architect for 15 years and was working with a large multifamily firm here in Denver. And like many people, had somewhat of an epiphany over COVID. It was kind of brewing before then. And what I realized was that while I loved working with the people I was working with and I loved managing projects and teams, I was a project manager at that time.
Hmm.
I didn't feel like I was doing like really soul-filling work. And where I was getting the most satisfaction in my work day to day wasn't actually in designing or, creating construction drawings or anything like that. It was in managing and leading and running a team and learning all of the tools that were necessary for me and were really helpful for me to do that in a solid way, like in a healthy way, I would even say. So the firm I worked at was smart enough, wise enough, kind enough to have a coach and consultant work with us. And he's been working with that company for 25 years. So while he was there, I worked with him for the 10 years that I was there and learned everything from the Enneagram to Brene Brown to everything from basic to even somewhat advanced communication tools. And it all sort of stemmed around this idea of self-awareness, how we can understand ourselves better so that we can then understand the people that we work with and serve better. And it really just changed how I was doing my work. It changed who I was as a human. And when COVID hit, I really dove a lot deeper into some of those tools. And I thought, this is what organizations need. This is what people need. And at that time, I really thought I would go down the life coaching path and help individuals and especially help women. And I do that now, but there are a lot of organizations who actually need these tools, and especially in the design industry, because that's where I come from. So I'm back in it, but on the other side of the fence, not in the deadlines, but helping leadership teams, helping staff.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I think it's interesting to hear you say, I thought I was going to go down the life coaching route, but I wound up more on the organizational side of things because it sort of reminded me of how I feel sometimes, and I don't know if this is why you think you did this, but I love working with clients so much. However, one of the things that I'm the most passionate about in my industry, in my world, is being out of our office, doing public speaking opportunities, leading workshops and seminars, and doing things that is not treating clients. And it's not because I don't enjoy treating clients, it's because I feel like I can have a bigger impact on more people by doing that other piece. And then we can just hire amazing providers on our team to take care of the clients and make sure they're still getting what they need. And then I can go have a bigger impact. And maybe you feel that way working with organizations and teams instead of one-on-one.
Absolutely. That was really what it came down to. It was that, being able to serve more people at once, working with companies that have, 25, 65, 100 people, and really being able to bring these tools to them. You get a much bigger impact all at once. And also, what I learned was I picked up all of this experience when I was working in the corporate world myself. I was working my way up through leadership and observing a company that was growing rapidly, how they handled those growing pains, how leadership was structured, how I was able to lead people, clients, projects, what was working, what wasn't. And the more I was talking to people, the more I realized those were their pain points too.
Hmm.
That was also where they were struggling. And it doesn't do any good to learn tools and not know how to actually practically apply them.
Yeah.
So it became super powerful when I shared my story of how I used all of this stuff and could tell them how I applied it in the real world and changes and actually benefits that I saw from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Is you have
Mhm.
information, but how do you actually utilize it and apply it? And that's the hard part for basically everybody. And I think this is just so important and relevant that we're having this conversation because the practice that I was with before I joined Physio Room, and at least my perception of the way things go in business and corporate America today is, so many things are bottom line driven, so many things are numbers driven, and what often happens is people that are the producers, the people that are doing the most, often are the ones that get promoted into the management leadership positions because they were the best producer. So now they're the one that gets rewarded with a new role. And what I know to be true, and I'm you know better than I do, is the best producers do not always make the best managers and leaders.
Yep.
In many cases, they don't.
Yep. Absolutely. I see that all the time. And there's a lot in architecture, it was really rampant, but it happens in every field. It's kind of this like, sink or swim, learn on the job. You'll figure it out, managers and leaders saying, I had to figure it out along the way. You will too. And there's some of that has to happen. There's some things that you can only learn by going through it yourself, but there are ways of making it a lot easier. There are ways of giving people a life raft, giving people some tools much earlier on that can bridge that gap from being a producer or being a sole contributor to then being a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
And one of the themes that we want you and I were talking about carrying through this conversation is this concept that you alluded to before of self-awareness. So before we start diving off and going down some tangents, if we were going to define what self-awareness is or what it means to be self-aware, how would you explain that?
Yeah, this isn't, Webster's definition or anything like that, but the way that I would describe it is being aware and consciously aware of who you are. And we are comprised of two elements, competency and character. Character is, our personality, how trustworthy are we, how reliable are we? And our competency is our skills, our knowledge, what we bring to the table, usually in a job setting, but not always. And I think we tend to have a lot of awareness of who we are from a competency standpoint because we are conditioned to build those skills our entire lives through school, through internships, through our first jobs. And
Mhm.
we really wear that out on our sleeves. And for a lot of people, we don't actually look at the rest, the character side.
Yeah.
But we think that we do because we're making our way through life every single day and we're doing pretty good for the most part. However, there are times where we get in our way if we can just be, again, conscious of it, conscious being the key term. So I actually have this quote that I love. Dr. Angiar, I know you've already heard it before, but I'm going to share it here because this is kind of the core of why I focus on self-awareness.
Mhm.
So this is by author Tasha Eurich. She says, data reveals that 95% of people believe they are self-aware, but the real number is 12 to 15%. That means on a good day, about 80% of people are lying to themselves about themselves.
Mm.
So again, we don't take a lot of time to turn inward and to really see what we're doing in our day-to-day life outside of the things that are task-based.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought up that quote because I was going to basically ask you that. And I was going to ask you if I had the statistic right. So
Yeah.
95% of people believe that they're self aware, but really 80% of us are not self aware.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess two things. One, um, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think most of us are not very self aware? Or another way to ask the question might be, why do you think many of us don't take the time to really like look inward and try to understand things? Is it because we don't have the time, we don't make the time, we don't know how to do it, we don't know what to do?
Yeah. I think there's a combination there. In my experience, I've seen many reasons why. One could be, yeah, not wanting to. Some people don't want to peek behind the curtain, right? It's scary back there, or it can be. I try to make it not scary. But some people don't want to take the time. They're fine just running on autopilot. Autopilot, for a lot of us, has gotten us to where we are today. And where we are today is not always a bad thing, right? So leave good enough alone.
Yeah.
Other reason I see a lot is conditioning, social conditioning. So that comes in a couple of different forms. I see a lot with men in particular that it's like, I don't want to go there, right? I don't like, it's fine. I can handle all the issues on my own. And I teach a lot about vulnerability as well. So that kind of ties into it too. There's a level of vulnerability to, like I said, peek behind that curtain. I also work a lot in the workplace, and there's been a stigma up until now. And I think that, like with the work of Brene Brown and some others, they're actually breaking that down. But it's this, do I have to talk about myself personally and who I am and my needs and my feelings and all of that in the workplace? A lot of people still don't want to go there because of that stigma. So those are the top reasons that I see.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And I think I've said this to a few different people, and we have had a couple mental health providers and therapists on this show. I think one of the best things in my experience that has come out of COVID is just people being more willing to talk about mental health related things, which we can lump this into because I believe that just like physical health evolves or sits somewhere along a spectrum, right? You could be in absolutely terrible shape, you could be in elite shape, you could be anywhere in between for a lot of different reasons. You could have different conditions um, that you're dealing with, and you could not have those. Well, I think mental health is the same thing. You could have challenges that you're working through. You could be at the peak performance mentally, or you could be anywhere in between. And it's like a spectrum, and we don't have to have uh, diagnosed problems to actually start working on something. We could just want to improve, how we communicate, how we understand ourselves, how we get to know and understand other people. So I think it's important that we're diving into this. I guess what I my one kickoff question would be, you pretty much have laid out that sometimes people don't want to know, or they leave well enough alone, like there's not a problem, so why should I try and fix something?
Yeah.
um or it's a social potentially reason. um what are some of like the tools and ways that you go about trying to help people even start the process of working on these things, start the process of becoming more self-aware with who they are,
Mhm.
but then they can translate that into how they lead and interact with other people?
Yeah. Well, as you were talking, like, you were saying there doesn't have to be a problem that you have to fix. It's kind of like physical therapy in a way. It's
Mhm.
like you can improve your form. You can realize ways that you're getting in your own way, or you're maybe doing something incorrectly, and make these like slight shifts or
Yeah.
slight tweaks and exercise those to actually gain far greater results. And that's essentially what I'm doing with people when I am helping them gain more self-awareness. I am not trying to tell anybody that there's something wrong with them. We're all great and beautiful just the way that we are. And I'm also not trying to wholesale change anybody. And I think that's what people get afraid of when they are going to take a peek behind that curtain. Like, oh, you're going to tell me I'm doing something wrong, or you're going to tell me I have to be better, or that I'm not a good person, or XYZ. I think there's some fear for some people around that. And it's like, no, not at all. We all have amazing strengths, and we all have some blind spots, and we all have that lack of self-awareness. 95% of us do have that lack of self-awareness, that if we were just made aware, and sometimes that's all it takes, is just to be made aware through either feedback. The Enneagram is a tool that I use. We can talk about that more in a bit, and just make small adjustments. When I'm coaching people, when I'm working with individuals, it's like, I do not want you to change. I do not want you to become unrecognizable to those who you're working with and living with and love. I couldn't do that even if I tried, because we all are who we are. But we can make these slight shifts once we become aware that we're getting in our own way a little bit, or we're getting in the way of healthy relationships a little bit, or we're getting in the way of being a better leader. And that's really all it is, and the changes are simpler than you might think.
Yeah, and man, you just laid that out perfectly. And now you've got my attention even more when you relate it to physical therapy like that, because that is so true that you don't have to have pain or injury or a problem to benefit from physical therapy, right? Like in our office, it is all about wherever someone is along their fitness journey. That could be they want to play with their grandkids, that could be they're training for climbing Mount Everest or the CrossFit Games or something very high level, and everyone is somewhere along that journey, whatever the activities are they're trying to do. And I was talking to a woman yesterday who has been dealing with something for a very long time. And the analogy I used with her was, this is like we're driving with the brake on. And
Mhm.
that, can you still get to where you're going? Maybe. The car might still move because maybe the engine overpowers the brake or something. But is that the most efficient way to get there? No, you're
Yeah.
burning through brake pads. Or it's like taking a, you know, souped up car that is supposed to have premium fuel and you're putting regular basic unleaded fuel in it. Is that going to give that car the best chance to run efficiently and as powerful as it can and last as long as it can and get the best gas mileage and everything? No, of course it's not. But
Mhm.
that's the stuff that we do with our body all the time and with our mind. So
Yep.
so let's talk about the Enneagram a little
Sure.
bit. I have once, twice, maybe in my life. I have gone, I think once for sure. I have gone through the Enneagram, but let's talk about what that is. I think a lot of people have heard about it, but maybe they don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's a personality assessment that is gaining popularity right now. It's been actually around for decades, and people are using it in organizations. They're also using it just individually. You'll see a lot of it on the gram. It's getting kind of popular in that way. It's not entirely dissimilar to Myers-Briggs or DISC or those other assessments.
Yep.
But what's different about it is that those assessments really do lend themselves towards the workplace, and it's talking about kind of those skills and attributes that people have, and how they work in the workplace. The Enneagram is actually not talking about what you do, it's talking about why you do what you do. So
Mm,
it is talking about the core motivations and the core struggles of each type. And there's actually a couple of layers of depth to the Enneagram that you don't typically see on social media, which is what I teach. And so those are called subtypes. So there can be these combinations of, why you do what you do, and then how you go about doing it. I say, so there at its very basic level, there's 9 types in the Enneagram. And I say that if you have one of each type in a room and they're all doing the same exact action, they're actually each doing it for 9 different reasons.
mm.
So it has much broader application. I mean, people are applying this to their relationships, to their work life, to how they raise their children. It really encompasses your whole living.
Yeah, I mean, it has, like you just said, it has more to do with your personality, even though these are all, personality assessments, but
Mhm.
it's more about your motivation behind why you're doing what you're doing instead of what do you do. And I think, I guess, just to pause for a second and go back on something we talked about before is with producers and whatnot getting promoted. I think so often from a social context, we associate who we are with what it is that we do, right?
Mm,
Someone might say, like, oh, well, who's Tiffany? Or, well, who's Andrew? And somebody might answer that question, or I might answer it saying, well, I'm a physical therapist,
right.
even though they just asked me like who I am, right? Well, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a all these other things, right? A brother. Um, or I'm someone who loves to do X, Y, and Z, instead of talking about like what our profession is. And that's what I think happens a lot of times. And that's
Mhm.
our identifier to ourselves, is what our career or our profession is, instead of like truly who we are deep down.
Yep. I went through that, and there was this struggle that I did not expect to hit when I left architecture. The reaction that I would, when I would say I was an architect, I think I got a little bit attached to the reaction that I would get. People love to hear it. Oh my God, that must be such a great job, architect. It's like, it's like doctor or lawyer. And when I went into consulting and coaching, everyone was just like, what is that? What do you mean by that? It's
Yeah.
still very ambiguous for a lot of people. And it was like, oh wow, I'm not getting that like immediate gratification by telling someone what I do, but I'm so much happier, feel like I'm making so much more positive impact. But my identity was very much tied up in that, what I did, and I didn't expect that to shift so much when I shifted careers.
Well, before we dive back a little bit more into like the Enneagram and how do we use it, do you have any idea like why do you think that is? Like why do you think we tie ourselves up so much in the identity of like what we do?
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, well, I'm gonna get a little bit nerdy with the Enneagram, and it's okay if people don't understand it. I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to
Yeah.
understand more. But I think it's societal. There are certain personality types that do very much encourage achievement, encourage meeting your goals. And you can actually see Enneagram types play out in cultural societies. And the US, and people might not know, some of your listeners might know, but some might not. The US is a three society. So the three in the Enneagram is about achievement, goals. It's also known as striving to be outstanding. It's very much like self-worth and self-image is tied into what we're doing, what we're achieving, what we call ourselves, who we are,
Mm,
from very much from a work perspective, because that's where goal and achievement comes in.
sounds about right. Mhm.
And I actually know that that's rewarded in our society, particularly in the US.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, exactly like what you just said, right? You
Mhm.
said that you got a different feeling and reaction from other people when you told them what you did,
Yep.
and it was an architect. You're like, you could tell by their reaction that they were like, oh wow, that's great, amazing. um as opposed to something else. And I think because of that, sometimes someone might feel, if they identify themselves with what it is that they do, they might feel ashamed to tell someone what they do if they don't think that that job or career is something that that other person's going to be impressed by.
Yeah.
But like we need people in all the roles, right? Like we need everything. um
Mhm.
so yeah, anyways, yeah, that makes sense to me that the US is a number three society.
Yep. It's really fascinating. I mean, Canada is a nine. I could go into like all of the different countries. It's another podcast, though.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we do one where we break things down. So okay, so somebody takes the Enneagram, like they answer the questions, and I don't know, my thought process when I'm going through these types of tests is I really try to just like go with my gut instinct to the answer to the question and try not to overthink it.
Mhm.
Because if I'm overthinking it, I'm probably trying to like skew the results or something. But so you do this with most of your clients, right?
Yep, I do it with all of my clients. That's the starting point, whether I'm working with an individual or an organization. And it just tells me a lot about them. And people do sometimes fall into the trap of answering the questions the wrong way, which is answering them how they want to be seen, trying to find the quote unquote right answer. Some answers might look more attractive to them than others, but are they really true to them? Are those answers really true to them as an individual? So what I tell people is answer the questions quickly. You were exactly spot on. It's kind of like when we were taking multiple choice questions when we were younger. It's like usually your first answer is right. Not to change your answers all around. So don't overthink it, take it quickly, but then also uh think about how you've been for most of your life.
Hmm.
Not in the most stressful times of your life, not when you were going through that divorce, not when you were switching careers, not when it was the pandemic, but how you've been through most of your life, because we all have ups and downs. We all have moments of stress. We all have times in which different types of character comes out. And there's reasons for that. And the Enneagram can kind of explain that too. But what we're trying to get to is your core type. And that's kind of who you are underneath it all. You might reach for different tools if your regular tools aren't working, but we want to know what your core stable type is.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, so that makes sense. So then, okay, so somebody takes the Enneagram and they
Mhm.
get the results of like how they answered the questions. It spits out one of those 1 through 9 types. And
Mhm.
then you had mentioned there's subtypes in there as well. But
Yep.
like I think like you alluded to before, I think where the challenge becomes is okay, I took this assessment, I have this result. Now what do I do? Now what do I do with this information? How do I apply this? So maybe we could talk on that just a little bit. Of like how could somebody who's listening to this podcast, they decide we've convinced them, go take the Enneagram.
Right.
And they want to figure out like, okay, well, how do I use any of this information to actually um not change who they are, but like just better their communication or anything that goes along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I'm finding more and more is that once you find out your type, and I really, really suggest that if someone is taking the Enneagram, you don't just take the top type that it spits out for you and say, okay, that's it, and call it a day. Your top type is usually somewhere within your top three scores. And this is something that I walk all of my clients through. I am not in a rush to pin a type on them. I want to make sure that we got it right and that it actually feels right to them. So I give them a few different viewpoints of like, here's your top three types. Here's what your top three core motivations would be. What in your heart of hearts actually feels right to you? And it might actually be your third highest score. And
Hmm.
there's reasons, like you start to see combinations of numbers come up at the top, and there's reasons for all of that. But I think the biggest mistake that I see people making is that, they go on Truity or something and it just spits out the results and they take the top and they're like, yep, that's great. Um, if you're not going to be working with a coach, what I would do, the easiest way to get to your top score is, or get to your true score, is ask your friends and family how they perceive you. That is, and I even have my clients do that if they're really struggling with finding a type. People are going to see you sometimes clearer than you can see yourself. Your spouse, your boss, your best friend of 20 years. Say, which one of these really sounds like me? And they can usually pin it right on the nose, whether you like it or not, whether you like what you're hearing or not.
Man, is that so true or what? I mean, I think other people notice things about us or perceive things about us way more than we do. And I
Mhm.
think that probably goes back to you laid out that statistic about most of us are not actually that self-aware, even if we think we are.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's true both internally and of like who we are and our personality, but also externally. I mean, we talk about that with our clients sometimes that somebody's spouse might notice them performing a movement better or them not complaining about their knee as much over the past few weeks. Or they might notice that somebody has lost weight or something when you don't see it in the mirror yourself because you see yourself every single day. Someone else might see you and they haven't seen you for a few months and say, wow, you look amazing. What have you lost weight? And you're like, well, yeah, actually, I did. Um,
Mhm.
other people do notice that stuff a lot. So I think that's
Yeah,
a good kind of direction. Feedback is a gift, right? And sometimes it's
absolutely.
a tough gift to receive, but it's a gift nonetheless.
That is one of the things that I teach my clients, because when we talk about how to gain self-awareness, feedback from others, and there's a healthy way to give and receive feedback, and I really teach that a lot too. It means someone cares about the relationship and they care about you and they're taking a personal interest in you when they give you feedback, no matter what kind of feedback it is, even if it is constructive feedback.
Yeah.
There's no such thing, or not no such thing, but we don't want to do constructive criticism. We want to do constructive feedback. So, um, so you were asking before, what do you then do with this information? So let's say you've been typed correctly. Uh, the real power of the Enneagram that I find is your strengths, really honing in on those strengths. So it's going to tell you kind of where your superpowers are. And that's every bit as important as looking at your blind spots or challenge areas and how to improve those. There are skills, there are attributes, there are energies that every type has that no other type has. And then when you get into the subtypes, it becomes even more nuanced. So really like celebrating those. And sometimes people are like, really? I'm that good at that? Or like, I just thought that this was something that everybody did. And I didn't realize that it was a gift that was very particular to me. So that's one. And then the blind spots, I think, are just so telling for people. And when I teach the blind spots, sometimes people are like, oh, no, 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 that's not me. Well, it's called a blind spot for a reason. And that's where the self-awareness comes in. That's where it's like, okay, well, ask your spouse again. Do you do this from time to time? Or have they noticed this about you? And sure enough, it'll usually come up.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I think in a way, like using well, I guess we'll call it objective. There's a lot of different tools. Using a tool like this that can give you some objective information,
Mhm.
and pointing out those strengths to you allows you to be a little bit more, what's the word? Like proud of them, or like give yourself a little bit more credit for the things that you are good at. Because I know for myself, and sometimes as I've received constructive feedback from other people, is I'm a very solution oriented person, and I'm always trying to fix something that is not performing well, or and that's what I do for my job, right? I'm always
And
trying,
it's in your name.
yeah, it's in my name, right? Um, so I have a hard time sometimes just acknowledging and being thankful or grateful or whatever for the things that are going great, or the things that I do a really good job at, or I don't give myself credit for that. So, and I know there's probably many other people that do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then, once you know that, again, it's not that there's anything wrong with you or anybody else. It's not that there is a huge, like, you have to throw away that part of your personality. I mean, we'll just use you as an example. Like that ability to find solutions, critically think through problems. I mean, that has served you so well in so many different areas of your life, right? What we're trying to look at are the neural pathways where we're using that as a shortcut, right? Instead of actually saying, okay, maybe a different tool is needed here. Maybe my wife wants me to actually just listen instead of solve the problem. That's the age old thing, that happens with people who really, really want to fix all of the time. And so it's just knowing when to pick up that tool and knowing when to use a different tool.
Yeah. Yep, Aaron, if you are listening to this podcast, know that that is something I'm working on. Because that's definitely true for us. Is I want to, she starts to share a challenge or a problem that she's going through, and I want to try to fix it right away,
Yep.
instead of just listen and then maybe ask if, well, what do you need for support from me right now? Do you want me to try and help you come to a solution, or do you just want me to, understand what's going on?
Yeah.
Um, and then if I get invited to help find a solution, then great, then we'll try and do that. And if
We're all
not,
over it.
yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So you get the results of the Enneagram, you learn what some of your strengths or superpowers are, where some of your blind spots lie. And then what?
Well, I also want to just add that as you're learning your blind spots and learning the tweaks to make, compassion. Compassion is huge, and dropping judgment. What I find a lot of times is just by knowing this information, and this is where it's really powerful in learning it with other people. So when I teach it to teams, when I teach it to groups, or if someone brings it home to their spouse or their family and they start talking about the Enneagram and learning more about it, you gain this understanding of yes, yourself, but then you're sharing that understanding with the people around you and using it, always using it with compassion. Like, oh, I understand so much more why you do some of these things. And now we can have an open conversation about it. You know, if it's like, if Erin is aware that, you know, okay, this is something that I do sometimes, she can have that conversation with you and say, I don't need you to fix it right now. This is what I need instead. So it opens up these conversations. And that's really where the power is in then being able to communicate what you're doing, why you're doing it, what you need, why you need it, and meeting other people where they're at as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like in a way what you're saying is by opening up this understanding and understanding like potentially why people do what they do, we're able to maybe get rid of some of the assuming that goes on, which is
Mm-hmm.
good for none of us probably because you assume someone thinks a certain way or feels a certain way about you or what you're going to say, and then that changes how you act. So yeah, if we have this better understanding, maybe we get rid of some of the assuming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is the hope. Um, the one other thing I wanted to mention is, so okay, you have this information. What now? Well, we're going to slip up, right? Like we have been doing things the way that we've been doing things our entire lives, and that is okay. And you're not going to fix anything overnight. So, one thing that goes hand in hand with the Enneagram and with self awareness and learning these new tools is mindfulness.
Mhm.
So, the way I just very quickly describe mindfulness in the way that we use it with the Enneagram to people that I'm working with is it's an interrupter. So the self-awareness gives you that ability to hopefully in your tracks say, "Oh, I'm about to go down that path again. Oh, I'm about to do this thing again that we've talked about, that I've learned about." And I jokingly say that once you know that your Enneagram type and once you know the tool, you're kind of screwed because you can't unknow it. But so it'll come up usually, and sometimes that takes a while. And the mindfulness piece is saying, "Oh, here I go again," and doing something in a split second that interrupts that pattern. Whether that's, okay, I'm just going to take a beat and think about it. I'm going to do some mindfulness exercises, which I sometimes give to my clients. I'm going to take a walk around the block, but I'm going to make a conscious decision to make that shift that I learned in coaching, or make that shift that my wife and I talked about.
Mhm. Yeah, I think, man, we all get, like you mentioned, autopilot earlier. We
Mhm.
all get into these patterns in autopilot all the time. And if we can, sometimes that's all it takes, right? Is a pattern interrupter to break that sort of cycle that we're on. And then it allows us to make the choice to change the behavior. I guess I'm curious, a question that came up as you were describing that is, have you found with some of your clients that sometimes people take the Enneagram, get the result, and then they just sort of sit back on that result and say, well, that's just who I am. Like something comes up of like things that maybe they could work on and improve, but instead they say, well, that's just my personality. That's just how I am and how I do things.
Yeah, people do that. They also use the Enneagram for evil and not good, where they say, oh, they start to stereotype people and say, you're just doing this because you are XYZ type. And that's really a misuse of the Enneagram. Here's the thing with anything in life, and this is something that I've had to get used to as a coach and consultant. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yeah.
And so people have a choice. They always have a choice. And you can't really control what they do with the tools that they're given. And it's just true of so many things. You can keep giving them feedback, which is something, I never recommend closing the lines of communication. Keep having those conversations. But some people, will feel very comfortable with where they're at. And yeah, having a way to explain it away or to have some logic or reason behind it makes them feel even more solidly where they're at. And it's really up to them to listen to the feedback and decide, is the relationships, that I'm hearing that this is affecting worth enough to me that I make some changes if they're warranted.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes that's what it comes down to is weighing out like, well, what's more important?
Mhm.
Going through the discomfort of this process and this change, or potentially letting that relationship or that business or that team flounder or dissolve apart as a result of not changing it. Um, Something else, another question that maybe sort of came up is I'm assuming the answer is both, but if someone took the Enneagram and came to these results, like, do you find it more common one way or the other that you end up coaching and helping to steer someone towards either addressing the blind spots or the weaknesses, or just trying to live and operate more in the strengths and like delegate those other things that they're not as strong at to other people potentially? Um,
Mm.
or is it always a combination of both of those things?
It's always a combination of both. Yeah. And it is also, do we want to delegate those things, or do we want to, and this is different in relationship dynamics versus team dynamics. Can you lean on others that have skills that you don't, or do you even have a desire to strengthen this aspect? Or what I would really love to see is someone say, I mean, we can pull things from every single Enneagram type, right? Like we can be gradually become just more well-balanced, well-rounded people. And that's an option too, is pulling from a little bit of all of it and sort of, I guess you could say, softening those edges. Enneagram's a circle. So
Right, right, right. Um, okay, so you had brought up the concept of mindfulness being an interrupter
mhm.
to help us become a little bit more self-aware and um, make the conscious choice to choose to respond a different way, do something different. Are there any particular like mindfulness strategies or practices that you really like to recommend?
Yeah, I do. Uh there's a program out there called Positive Intelligence, and Shirzad is the instructor, and he talks about a few tools that I have really, really loved sharing with my clients, and I do them myself. And why I love them is because you can do them in the moment. Say you're on a call or in a meeting, and or talking, in a deep heated conversation with someone, and nobody will really know that you're doing them, and they're so freaking simple. So one of them is rubbing your fingertips together. Have you heard of this
Yeah,
before? Yeah.
heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. And trying to just feel the ridges on your fingerprints and your fingertips. You can just do that down by your side or on the desk or whatever. No one will even realize that you're doing it. But as soon as you get that inkling that, oh, I'm about to react this way, or I really want to say this, or I really want to do that, just start doing that until you can choose something else to do.
Mm.
And it may take a few minutes of doing that. The other one is breathing in and out through your nostrils
Yep.
and feeling the temperature of the air as it goes into your nostrils versus the temperature of the air as it goes out of your nostrils. So again, a perfect one to do if you're in a meeting, if you're in an argument, if you just want to be incognito with your mindfulness techniques.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that because of the incognito aspect of it because um I guess there's one other one that I'm thinking of. I think the two that I'm the most common with or most familiar with, excuse me, would be nasal breathing, like you said, but doing it in an alternate nostril
Mm.
concept where you inhale through one side, exhale through the other side, and then inhale through the side you just blew the air out of, and you just alternate back and forth, inhaling and exhaling through one nostril at a time. But you probably don't want to do that on a Zoom call or something because somebody might wonder what you're doing. And then the idea of doing a body scan, which
Yes.
is not all that dissimilar to rubbing your fingers together and being hyper aware of feeling for, you know, the fingerprints, is just scanning slowly throughout your body and bringing your mind and your awareness to different points from your toe all the way up to your head and back down. I think those work really well. And I think I was very I've done this a handful of times. Most recently, I was in a yoga class where we were at the end of class and laying in the final like shavasana resting position. The instructor led us through a body scan instead of just having us lay there and listen to the music or whatever. Because I know for me, my mind tends to want to wander in that moment, or my mind is wondering if I should glance at my watch and see like, oof, what time exactly is it? I gotta go. And he was able to keep us just focused on the moment until we were done. And oh, I thought that was so good.
It's so powerful. I love body scans. There's also body compass calibrations. Have you ever done that before?
Don't think so.
That's something that I will sometimes do with individual coaching clients, where you start with a body scan and then you maybe go through your to-do list and then you see what sort of somatic reactions your body is having to different things. And you start with a to-do list just because it's simple, and you see like cues that your body is giving you that you just are not aware of day to day.
What
And
did
then
you,
you
a body compass, something?
calibration.
Calibration, body
Yeah.
compass.
So then you can use, like, once you calibrate it, you can use that and use the sensations that come up when you are trying to make decisions in your life or trying to decide which direction to go. I mean, your body holds so much power. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I I think what I always think back to when we talk about our body helping us make a decision is half the reason I'm here having this conversation with you now, because my wife Erin and I's decision to move out here to Colorado was largely based on a gut decision. Like, it maybe logically didn't make sense if we lay out all the pros and cons and we just think on paper about making a decision, we probably wouldn't be here right now in Colorado. And but it was one of those things where I just trusted what my body and my gut was telling me, and here we are. So I think there's a lot of power in that. Not that you shouldn't consider all the situations, but sometimes we feel deep down a certain way for a reason.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a little bit, and do you think you're an 8 in the Enneagram? Is that, or have you confirmed that?
8 is the challenger, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the last time I took the Enneagram, which again, that was, man, it was probably 2 years ago now. That was the top category that it rated me as. Yeah. I forget what the other two were, like what the top three was and stuff, but the 8 definitely was how I scored as the top one.
Well, we'll have to get you squared away
Yeah.
and honed in. But the reason that I bring that up is that the Enneagram can be split into three different centers that help us, make decisions in life. And one is the body center, one is the heart center, and one is the head center. And the 8 is in the body center, and that means really strong gut instinct and really have more of a connection to your body's messaging than, and it's kind of like do before think or feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Shoot, pull the trigger and ride the bullet and see what happens.
Yeah, fire, ready, aim.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, and I think there's big benefit or strength in all of those different, categories, right? Whether you follow your mind, your heart, or your gut in making decisions. And again, we need all of those things in society. We need people in all of those different categories and in all these different numbers in the Enneagram. Is there a trend? Are there any trends that you tend to see? Like you said, as a whole, the US as a society is at 3 and Canada's at 9. Do you tend to find that like men are more likely this, women are more likely this, or like certain subsets of people, like
Yeah.
these professions tend to be this number and these professions tend to be that number. What are some of the big overall trends that you tend to find?
Well, I see a lot of patterns among different professions. So whenever I'm working within a company, like I can see, like for instance, an engineering company is going to have a lot of maybe ones and fives, uh, just because they tend to be more analytical thinkers, problem solvers. A little bit more introverted as well. Each type can be introverted or extroverted. That's a separate point. But
What is number
uh,
two?
who's number two?
What is number two on the Enneagram?
Oh, that is striving to be connected. The helper, like
I
kind of
think,
like Mother Teresa, the
think
very
that's
emotionally
maybe,
driven.
I think that's maybe the one when we did this throughout our team 2 years ago. I think that was the one that had the most of our team members in common.
Yeah.
And then there were, others of us that, one of this, one of that, one of this other one, but there were like four twos or something.
Yeah. I mean, to be in physical therapy, helping people who are sometimes in pain, who want to feel better. The twos are caretakers, they're natural caretakers. So that makes a lot of sense. I've worked with nonprofits, and you'll see a lot of twos in that industry as well, or in those industries as well. Also, eights, because eights are just very passionate change makers. And it's like they want to drive policy and people forward. So, yes, that's very fascinating. I always love seeing those patterns that come up. You asked about men and women, and that's really interesting because it is true that our personalities are formed before we are born, which is a whole other fascinating topic. But there's like the nature and nurture piece, right? So I see a lot of women who are twos and nines. So twos being the caretaker, uh, the connector, the helper, nines being the peacemaker, not wanting to rock the boat, wanting to make sure everyone's okay. And that very much is in alignment with female conditioning, societally.
Mhm.
So we have to kind of sort through, is that your core motivation, or is that societal conditioning that's coming up?
Interesting. And then
Yeah.
what about on the men's side? Do you see some trends that way too? Or is that
Yeah.
scattered?
I see more male eights than female eights. I see a lot of male ones and fives.
Got it. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I mean, now being a new dad, I can totally get behind that your personality is largely um decided before you're born, because our little 2-month old, he's got a personality all of his own that's not exactly the same as Aaron's or I's. And even before he started making really any noises, you can see that personality coming out a little bit, and it's just going to continue to evolve. I think that's very interesting, and I think you bring up a good point, that of this concept of nature versus nurture, and what's more dominant, or what weighs heavier on things, because I think there definitely are um societal constructs that we do something because that's the way it is. And then as far as patterns go, we see the same thing in our profession, right? We see uh runners have a lot of the same issues. Cyclists have a lot of the same
Yeah.
issues. Basketball players, soccer players, like you name it, right? Are the things that we do with our body over and over and over again, oftentimes are going to dictate what it is that we're dealing with physically and what's breaking down and whatnot, especially when we start talking about these repetitive activities like an endurance sport or something like that.
Yep. Yep. And your mind is just another muscle, and it's going to eights are gonna eight, sevens are gonna seven.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job, especially a little bit ago on the mindfulness part, of giving people that are listening to this a couple different examples of things that they could do to interrupt their day or their thinking, and do something just to tap in and be present and mindful for a moment. And then we talked a bit about, if you use a tool like the Enneagram to help you understand what your strengths are and what some of your blind spots are, in that sometimes just being aware of those things can help all by itself.
Yep.
Let's just give somebody one more thing of like, okay, they understand they see what their strengths are, they see what their blind spots are. um, Maybe they're considering working with a coach like yourself, but what if they're not quite yet to that point where they are ready to work with a coach and really take this and run with it? How can they take just that next step forward of starting to implement something to actually facilitate some change?
Well, if you're not going to work with a coach, I actually would recommend a few books that they dive into so that they can really learn more about the other really powerful aspects of the Enneagram, which are your connecting points and your wings.
Mm.
So the connecting points are where you go to in times of stress and growth. And so those are the times where you are acting like a different person essentially, or like you're like, oh, I'm an 8, but like a lot of times I'll have moments where I act like a 2. Well, 8 and 2 connect. And so really understanding those nuances, I think, are great. And I can give you a couple of links to put in the show notes if you'd like.
Yeah.
But the Enneagram connection is a great one. It talks about how your type relates with every other type in the Enneagram. Um, let's see, awareness to action is one that I use in organizations, and it really also talks about it's exactly that, awareness to action, how to bring these tools into making change.
Tiffany, I think we found our title to this podcast episode. I think we're going to go with awareness to action, because I think at the end of the day, that's sort of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about most people aren't self-aware. There are tools out there that can help you take a step forward towards becoming more self-aware. And then what? And then what do you do with that? How does that get implemented, or what action steps do you take? And I recorded an episode a few weeks ago about the concept of knowledge not being power, right? And people say knowledge is power, and largely that was what the conversation focused on, was that without action, having the information does not do anything for you. And that's exactly the same with this, that you know it's good to have the information, but you need to then just take that next step and start implementing things. Which is why, I mean, if you're listening to this and this is something you're strongly considering, man, I would recommend Tiffany. Or if you prefer to work with someone in person and you're in Australia listening to this, because I was looking at the podcast stats and we have several listeners in Australia. Thank you for tuning in. And you want to work with somebody like locally, but like find a coach that
Yeah.
you can work with to go through some of this stuff, because professionals, or we use the phrase like coaches even need coaches, right? Like we all could benefit from a coach, and many of the great coaches out there have coaches of their own. So strong recommendation from me.
Yeah, and many coaches, including myself, work remotely and virtually, and all of these tools are tools that I can teach virtually. So you can really find, and I encourage people to shop around a little bit for a coach. It's really just like a therapist or a physical therapist or a
Yep.
doctor.
Yep.
They need to be in alignment with you and your values, and don't just go with anyone. So shop around a little bit, interview some people.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And some of you may know, listeners to this podcast, if you've never been a client in our office at Physio Room, you get a discount because you listen to the podcast. So if you are looking for a provider from that standpoint, man, come see us and mention that you heard about it on the Code podcast. But it's so true. You need to find somebody that you connect with. And I think if you looked at all of the physical therapists on our team, you would find that the caseload, right, the schedule of each provider has a personality that mirrors that person, right? I attract clients that I connect really well with, and so do all the other providers on our team. And that's one of my favorite parts of being on a team, is if for some reason we're just not feeling like the connection with the client and the provider is like as good as it can be, we can refer to our other teammates. Or sometimes we refer people elsewhere, right, to a different coach. And I think back to maybe being self-aware, once you start to understand that as a provider or as a coach or a consultant, you don't take that piece of the puzzle personally, right? we can't be the best solution for every single person out there. We're going to connect really well with some people, and a different coach is going to connect with other people better than we can. And that's okay. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and those within the health and wellness sphere, coaches, physical therapists, anybody, really the well-being of the client should come first. And so if for a second you think that you're not the best person for them, then I've done that before too. I mean, there's so many different types of coaches out there, and it's like, I'm not the one that you need. You really need someone who specializes in this or someone who has this type of experience. And I will gladly make that connection because I want the best for that person.
Hmm. Totally. And I have found from like a business standpoint that just ends up coming back some other way in the future, right? If you just do what's in the best interest of that person in front of you or virtually, whatever, it's always going to make its way back around to you at some point.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Well, I thought this was awesome, Tiffany. Let's make sure we leave our listeners. This will be in the show notes, of course, but let's make sure we leave everybody with some information of where they can find you, where they can find some of this stuff online. So, what's going to be the best way if folks have questions and they want to get in touch with you or find some of your information online? Where can people do that?
Yeah, my website is tiffanycelluracoaching.com. You can always shoot me a message through there. I'm on social media, Instagram at Tiffany Cellura Coaching, and also on LinkedIn, and checking my DMs daily on those platforms.
There you go, guys. Send her a message. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes if you have questions or thoughts that come up. And then, of course, you can find all my information and Physio Room's information in the show notes as well. Please use it. Additionally, if you have not already done this, man, we are trying to increase our reviews on this show up to 200 5-star reviews so that we can get this show out to more and more people in Australia, in the UK, and everywhere else that people are tuning in to listen to this. So if you've not already left us a review, scroll to that spot of your podcast platform and please go do that for us. We hope to catch you guys on another episode of The Code. Again, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I thought this was great.
Thank you for having me. I so enjoyed talking with you.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you on the next episode of The Code.